Hey everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Witty Wallet. My name is Christopher Fu, financial advisor, founder of Mavenbridge Capital, a wealth management company based in Orange County, California, serving families all across the entire country. First off, I want to say and wish that everyone is enjoying their summer so far. Hope you guys are spending time with your family, friends, going on vacation, perhaps maybe exploring some new places. Whatever you're doing, I hope you're having fun and please stay safe out there. Especially if you're out and about, be sure to hydrate yourself, especially in this heat wave we're having across the entire country. First off, I want to say thank you to each and every one of you for your support of this financial podcast. When I set out to do this podcast, my mission was to spread financial awareness and financial literacy because I truly believe that if we all as a society have a little bit more knowledge that we can apply to our own financial situation, that perhaps society can be a much better place when it comes to making smart financial decisions. The feedback that I've received so far has been unbelievable. And for that, I'm truly grateful because it gives me the fuel that I need to continue doing this podcast. So thank you guys again so much from the bottom of my heart for your continued support of this podcast. With that being said, I'm excited to be here with you guys today in part 2 of this 3-part series, How Much Do I Need to Retire Comfortably? So stay tuned. For nearly 2 decades as a financial advisor, I've had the privilege of helping many families and individuals navigate the complex terrain of what we call our financial lives. And I know you, like me, setting goals is absolutely important. And we're in constant search for tools, people, and resources that can help us reach and attain those goals. And that's probably why many of you are listening to this podcast. I believe that the more goals we set for ourselves, the more abundant our lives will be. But that also means that we're faced with many different mountains throughout our lives that we must climb. And each mountain symbolizes a specific goal, such as buying a new home or building a family, starting a business, selling a business, or deepening relationships with our spouse, our families, and of course, my favorite, the topic of this conversation, achieving retirement. Now, in part 1 of this 3-part series, I went into my personal thoughts and feelings about how I believe society has done a decent job in helping us with climbing up this retirement mountain in what I call the accumulation phase of our journey to the peak, which is retirement. And they've done this in several different ways. First of all, we of course have seen a reduction in the availability of pensions. For many of us, pensions are becoming far fewer available. And so we are left to save a lot on our own. And so many companies have adopted 401k plans or 403bs, 457s, some type of retirement plan for their employees to have the ability to save on taxes, but also to save and accumulate towards their retirement. Now, in addition to these 401k plans, a lot of companies have also adopted auto enrollment. And this is where, for example, you get hired on to a new company, they sometimes will automatically enroll you into the 401k plan without you knowing. And a portion of your paycheck automatically starts going into your 401k. And so a lot of people, this helps a lot of people because, again, it's kind of a out of sight, out of mind. If you don't expect or didn't expect to have that money in your paycheck and you didn't even know that it was going towards a savings plan for yourself, that could benefit a lot of people who maybe might have difficulty with saving in the first place. So, auto enrollment has been very beneficial for jumpstarting and getting a lot of people started towards saving for their future and for their retirement. And Where they've also helped is in what we call target date funds. And so when you look at your investment options inside of your retirement plan, you often see a menu, a plethora of many different options that you can put your money into, right? Large cap funds, small cap, international, bonds, government bonds, you name it. But there are also what we call target date funds. And these are funds that will typically have a number which represents a year, and that year is supposed to represent your anticipated retirement. So, for example, we're in the year 2023, and say your expected retirement or what you're shooting for is to retire by the year 2060. So, that fund is designed because we're still far away from the year 2060. It's designed to be in more of a growth mindset right now. So you're going to have a lot more money in the stock market in that fund right now. But as we gradually inch closer and closer towards the year 2060, what automatically happens is the portfolio automatically adjusts the risk inside of the portfolio for you. In essence, what it does is it starts to take less money and put more money into bonds and government bonds and cash, and put less into the stock market for you. And the idea behind that is to lower your risk as you're getting closer and closer to retirement. So, as I mentioned, again, society has done a decent job in helping us with the accumulation, the uphill battle in growing and saving for our retirement. But where I think society has not helped us a lot is in, well, what happens once we hit that peak? Once we hit retirement, potentially in the next 30 years in retirement, the decumulation phase. Because again, with the lack of pensions, most of us, again, are left to figure out what our retirement picture is going to look like. And a lot of that is going to be because of the efforts in our own savings and investing. Again, most people have been taught that you need a specific dollar lump sum amount to retire comfortably. $10 million, $5 million, $2 million, whatever that number magically is, in some sense, this is true. But in all reality, how are we supposed to really know what that dollar amount needs to be if we don't have a plan that addresses what your cash flow needs will need to be for the next 30 plus years potentially in retirement? And more importantly, since it's hard for most of us to define how much we'll need to spend for the next 30 years, because again, let's be honest, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what the next 30 years is going to look like. Having a flexible spending plan can help provide more clarity. So, in this episode, we're going to begin our journey down that mountain by exploring the importance of understanding what your cash flow needs are going into retirement, and also adopting and having a flexible spending plan in place during your retirement. So let's begin by first just backing up a little bit and talking about the decumulation phase in retirement, right? And this is basically spending down your savings. We've been taught most of our lives up to this point to save and save, right? Save 10 to 15% of your income and just don't worry about it, right? Just it'll be some lump sum by the time you hit retirement. But when you're going into the decumulation phase, you're starting to spend down that savings, right? You're not working anymore. You're not earning a paycheck. You're going to have to pay yourself. So spending down your savings, for a lot of people, this can feel a little bit scary, right? It can feel like a loss because, again, you're pulling money from what you've saved for. And unfortunately, a lot of people enter into this part of their retirement really just winging it, with no real plan in place, which, to be quite honest with you, is a bit scary. And because if you really think about it, you're stepping into a completely new reality. See, because when you're working, and you're saving, you're earning a paycheck, right? The market, you could go through a couple bear markets while you're working. You have time in essence, right? So you have do-overs during the accumulation phase. Um, but it's hard because you really don't have any do-overs in retirement during the accumulation phase because you have no more paycheck unless you decide to go back to work. But again, when you hit retirement, who wants to go back to work? And more importantly, would you have the ability to be able to go back to work? So, again, it's hard for a lot of people because it can feel like a loss when you're starting to spend down your savings. So, planning your decumulation strategy is very important for several reasons because there's a lot of uncontrolled factors that we're going to experience in retirement. The number one factor that most retirees are concerned about is healthcare risk and healthcare costs. Because let's face it, we don't know what our bodies are going to do the older we get, right? We could be one of those individuals that lives our entire lives without any health crisis or healthcare major healthcare needs, or we could be those that upon starting retirement, unfortunately, start to have a lot of healthcare problems. So that variability, that unknown, again, of course, naturally becomes a very top concern for a lot of retirees, especially because also the healthcare costs. There's a lot of variability in healthcare costs and what type of healthcare you'll need is very unpredictable. So again, we can't necessarily control the healthcare risks. Now, of course, we can do our part, right? Exercise, eat healthy, that we can control. But as far as retirees and what their number one concern is heading into retirement, it's healthcare. Now, of course, we are also faced with market risks. And a lot of us, when we hit retirement, the last thing we're going to do is pull our money out and just put it in the bank account and start spending it. Most of us, we're going to continue to invest that money. Uh, so, of course, there's always going to be continued risk. But what if, let's just say, as you're accumulating, you were going through a very great time in the stock market. But during retirement, maybe your returns might be potentially lower than you originally had planned for. How do you tackle that potential risk? And longevity risk. This is, again, something that I always bring up, again, is how long will you live? Again, who knows? We don't have a crystal ball, but you do have to plan to make sure that you don't outlive your money. That's longevity risk, right? The risk of you outliving your money. And so that's why I say for someone that retires at age 65, potentially plan to live and retire for another 30 plus years, right? We just don't know. So we want to make sure that we account for longevity risk. And of course, inflation risk. We can't control this. We can't control what happens in the economy and how inflation affects us. But basically, it is going to affect your spending needs in the future. And maybe you didn't account for that. Maybe you did not account for that the cost of vacations, the cost of food, the cost of basic necessities would be higher than you originally planned. So we need to understand that and understand how does that affect our overall retirement phase. And portfolio shock risk. This is essentially the risk where there's a sudden large decrease in your portfolio value, either from market decline. Like, for example, 2020, when we went through COVID and the stock market lost 34% in one single month. It's a huge portfolio shock. Or maybe you had a large expense, a large unforeseen expense that you needed to spend money on, that you had to make a large withdrawal out of your portfolio. Right? This portfolio shock. These are things that sometimes are out of our control. So it's important in this essence to have a plan to kind of tackle these unforeseen and uncontrollable situations, but also simulate what could these situations do in as far as your continued success to be able to enjoy, most importantly, your retirement. Now, one of the things that I notice when working with a lot of people for the last 2 decades, we've gone through several bear markets. And for those that are retired, it's very different compared to, as I mentioned, when you were working, right? You don't have a paycheck anymore. So when you start to pay more attention to your portfolio, right, you start to realize and you have much more of a emotional response to losses than to gains. Basically, you're looking online on the computer, and the reds, right, symbolize losses. The greens symbolize gains. We tend to pay more attention to losses than we do gains, and this is a bias we call loss aversion. And for someone that is retired, this can be very anxiety provoking. It can sometimes also make us make decisions that aren't in our best, are the best thing for us. Because again, we tend to place more emphasis on losses than we do gains. Think back, for example, your own self. When you monitor your investments, do you get happy on the days when the market is up? For me, it's like, oh, yeah, great. The market's up. Perfect. Made some money. But when the markets are down, we tend to give a lot more attention to that period. And that's because, again, we have a natural bias to pay more attention to losses. So if you're in retirement, and this is a human natural bias, that, like I said, that could play a lot of anxiety into, the decisions that you're going to have to make in how you spend your money. So this is important and why we need to start focusing when we're going into retirement and in retirement, planning and understanding what our cash flow needs are going to be, because again, this can help with this bias that we naturally have. In fact, studies have actually shown that investors who were able to identify their cash flow needs before entering into retirement, they were 1.9 times less likely to be highly loss averse compared to other groups. Basically, they were able to have a little bit less stress when it came to this idea of our natural behavior of loss aversion, paying attention to the losses more than the gains, because again, they had a defined cash flow plan. Well, why else is it important to have a personal cash flow plan? Well, first of all, you need to be able to approach your retirement plan from a personalized standpoint because, as I mentioned, everyone's situation is different. So, by understanding your unique situation, you're not going off of what the general public is. But what this also does too is having a cash flow plan helps to minimize, or at least try to minimize, what we call sequence of return risk, which in essence is a risk that the order and the timing of investment returns are unfavorable, which ends up resulting in less money for your retirement. Quite honestly, sequence risk is, for the most part, a matter of luck. In essence, for example, let's just say you retire and you start your withdrawals during a bear market or down market, and that market lasts for several months or even years. Those withdrawals end up being more costly for you because you're taking from the balance and there's nothing, no gains, right? There's only losses. There's no gains to help replenish those withdrawals versus you retiring and starting to withdraw during a bull market. Those withdrawals that you're making are then offsetted partially by new gains. So, of course, again, timing is everything, but at the same point, we can't time, right? So, how do we help minimize this sequence of return risk? Well, again, that's where the importance of having an understanding of what your personal cash flow needs going into retirement can help minimize some of this additional risk. And of course, having a diversified portfolio can potentially help protect your savings against this sequence of return risk. So, defining your cash flow, it all starts with listing and prioritizing your expenses. As I mentioned in previous podcasts, it's starting with your essentials, your housing, your food, your healthcare costs, transportation, clothing. Then you move on to your non-essentials, hobbies, travels, entertainment, Starbucks, whatever it is. List out your expenses from priority. Right? This is going to give you a good idea of what your cash flow situation is going to look like. Now, as I mentioned, again, we don't have a crystal ball, so we cannot essentially predict what cash flow is going to look like for the next 30 plus years. That's why when it comes to any type of financial plan, it is always meant to be not set in stone, but it's always meant to be changed and it's always meant to be updated because your life is going to change. But it is important to understand what your cash flow needs are, just like a business. What is coming in, what is going out. Of course, there's other things, again, that I mentioned before that we need to consider and make adjustments for, such as inflation, the cost of goods and services going up and down in price during retirement. We got to plan for that situation. And also, we have to make sure that we also have emergency funds for those unexpected costs. And so now that you've been able to define a little bit of what your cash flow needs are going to look like, this really sets you up for the foundation. And as we all know, like I mentioned many times, that we don't know what the next 30 plus years of our retirement will potentially look like or what our spending is going to look like. But this, again, gives us a foundation of where to start. And this is where the second part of this is adopting a flexible spending plan is something that should be highly considered when it comes towards planning for your retirement. Because again, uncertainty is huge. And so we do this by, again, as I mentioned, solving for our essentials, the things that we need. But then we also need to be able to identify those expenses that can be adjusted or maybe postponed or minimized, like a vacation, or maybe buying a second home or having home renovations or purchasing a new car every 10 years. And so having and adopting a flexible spending plan has shown to be able to give a lot of retirees a lot more flexibility and a lot more of a defined plan. Because, for example, when the markets do well, right, the idea behind that is withdraw a little bit more in an up market, right? It's kind of like if you were still working and you got a raise, right? Your portfolio, your investments basically gave you a raise. So, withdrawing a little bit more in an up market. But on the opposite end, when the markets don't do well, maybe adjusting your spending and spending a little bit less on those, again, discretionary expenses, vacations, home renovations, whatever it is. So being able to adopt and have a flexible spending plan can help with some of these uncertainties that we're going to experience in retirement. But again, we have to first be able to identify your basic necessities and what those cash flow needs are going to look like. And then around that, adopt this flexible spending plan and make adjustments each and every year, depending on how your portfolio is, what your spending needs are, and then have that flexibility around that. Because having a flexible spending plan, will affect certain things, of course, as we mentioned. It could affect your travel, vacation. It can affect entertainment needs or dining out goals, and of course, charitable donations or gifts to families and friends. But again, just adopting this can go a long way, especially in your retirement planning. So to kind of give you an idea of where I implement this with a lot of my clients when we're planning for retirement is we first of all try to solve for, again, their essential cash flow needs, right? Or what are all the expenses that we need to ensure we cover for the next 30 plus years. then we try to see, okay, well, what is the maximum amount of money that we could potentially spend um, based off of what we've accumulated and what we're projecting to accumulate, and based off of our tools and the simulations that I run for them. And this gives us a range, and that's kind of that flexibility of spending. But we don't know what that flexibility is if we haven't defined exactly how much cost and how much in cash flow needs we're gonna potentially need in retirement. So that's why it's so important when heading into retirement that you define what your cash flow needs are. Because once you have that defined, then you'll be able to get a better sense of how much flexibility you're going to have in your spending. And this will be able allow you to be more adaptable and responsive to different circumstances that change. Right, life changes. You need to be able to have a flexible approach in order to be more financially secure in the long run. And so, understanding your cash flow needs and planning for that before heading into retirement, and adopting in addition to that, a flexible spending plan in retirement. What that's also going to do too, it's going to help in helping you define, for example, when you want to retire. Right, most of the time, people don't know exactly what age they will retire at, or they haven't defined that, or some people will say, I'm going to retire at 65 because that's when I'm eligible for Medicare. But what if you had the ability to retire much sooner than that? Or what if you don't have that ability and you actually need to work a little bit longer? How would you actually know these things if you haven't planned that out? Right? So, the idea behind having a plan and understanding your cash flow needs and adopting a flexible plan is so that it gives you more power and the ability, to be quite honest with you, to decide when you want to retire. So that is the most important thing. And what it also is going to do, to be honest with you too, it's going to help you start to think about how to maximize your Social Security as well, which we're going to go more in depth in part 3 of this 3-part series. But to kind of give you a little bit of a teaser, again, when it comes to Social Security, right, it's going to be the ultimate pension for most of us. And most people will have this mindset of, oh, it's my money, I want to take it as soon as possible, but because you never know. I may die tomorrow, so I want to get some of it at least. But the thing is, as I mentioned in previous podcasts, as I talked about Social Security, is you get a big reduction. And so when we're talking about 30 years of retirement, and if you had the ability to wait to get for your Social Security benefits, how would you actually know that without knowing all of your cash flow needs? So that's why it's so important to, again, identify what your needs are in retirement and have some type of flexible approach, which would help you ultimately see when is the best time to start taking Social Security and maximize it for your benefit. And so this is why I feel it's so important to not just know how much money you need to have in retirement, but you also need to have a really good grasp and a good understanding of what as a business, for example, what your cash flow needs are going to be in retirement. And as we mentioned, again, we don't know what retirement is going to look like for 30 years. Retirement is not a linear, it doesn't go straight, right? Our lives are going to go up and down, and so is our spending. So this is where we also need to add on top of a normal cash flow plan, a flexible spending plan. But we need to be able to define these things and have an idea and be able to model and simulate this out. Because again, by doing so, as we talked about, what this can help with our bias, our human bias of loss aversion, where we pay attention to losses in our investments far more than we do in praising and paying attention to the gains. And again, from a psychology standpoint, that can bring on a lot of stress, undue stress for retirees. So by having a little bit more of a defined plan, it can help with that human behavior of paying attention to losses more than gains, which could lead us to make some bad decisions that could affect us in the long run. But what it also can help us do is it can help us navigate the sequence of return risk, right? And it's basically, you know, pulling money out in a down market or a bear market is a lot more impactful in a negative way than it is pulling money out of your portfolio in a bull market because your gains are helping recoup some of the money that you're drawing out. But again, it's a matter of timing and it's also a matter of luck. And again, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know when the markets are going to be a bear market or a bull market. So again, it's, as I say, it's important to be able to find what your cash flow needs are to be able to help navigate some of these risks that are out of our control. Again, there's a lot of risks, right, that we talked about that are out of our control. Healthcare risks, healthcare costs, it's variable. We don't know how our bodies are going to be over the next 30 plus years. Naturally, our bodies will degrade, right? But we're doing our best. And when it comes to our diets and physical activity to keep our bodies in shape, but we just don't know. So healthcare costs as well is a big risk to our nest egg. Of course, market risk. We don't know what the markets are going to do. We don't have a crystal ball. And what if we anticipate that we were going to get a same average nominal return that we've gotten for the last 30 years, but we end up getting less? How is that going to affect your retirement picture? Longevity risk, inflation risk, right? Portfolio shock risk. These are all risks that we face when we're going into retirement. And so how do we address that? It's, again, we got to understand what our cash flow needs are. That's why it's so important, for you guys to work also with a financial advisor who understands this and who can communicate this to you, and how this actually would affect you personally. And more importantly, they should be able to help give you some advice and some action plans and steps that you need to be able to make in order to feel a lot more prepared as you're heading into retirement. Or even for those of you that are already retired and are feeling this sense of uncertainty, again, it's also important for you, even if you're already retired, and you haven't done the work, to define what your cash flow needs are, and see what adjustments you need to make. So again, I hope this is been useful for you because my number one goal, as I mentioned, is to be able to help people take control of their financial future. I know there's a lot of, like I said, uncertainties out there, but there are a lot of things that we can do and people out there that can help you take more control of your finances as opposed to just winging it. I don't like winging it, and I don't want any of my clients to ever feel like they have to wing it. That's why I love what I do and why I do what I do. So if you need help, reach out to your financial advisor. If you don't have one, I would love to chat with you. I offer virtual coffee chats. Like I said, I help clients all throughout the country with the beauty of Zoom. I do a lot of Zoom calls with a lot of people. So again, we'd love to have a virtual coffee with you guys. If you guys have some questions, you guys want to see how this could potentially help your personal situation, shoot us an email. Our email address is hello@mavenbridgecapital.com. You can also visit us at mavenbridgecapital.com or follow us on social media for more information. Like I said, I'm a firm believer in a plan, and as a financial planner, we live and breathe this every single day, and that's why I'm so passionate that everyone should have a plan. And if you don't, one of the resources that we offer on Maven Bridge Capital is a free basic financial plan. It takes less than 7 minutes to complete, and it's available on mavenbridgecapital.com. There's a link in the show notes as well for you to take the assessment and get your free plan. Now, as a preview for the next episode, as part 3 of this 3-part series, we're going to talk about, continue to talk about the theme, how much do I need to retire comfortably? But we're going to discuss Social Security maximization now that we've defined what our cash flow needs are going to be and adopted a flexible spending plan. But we're also going to discuss your legacy, your wealth plan, and discuss why this is important to define this early on and how does this fit into how much you're going to need to retire comfortably. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in to this other episode of Witty Wallet. Again, my name is Christopher Fu. Hope you guys are enjoying your summer. And again, please stay safe out there. Have a wonderful day.
Securities offered through Kestra Investment Services, LLC, member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Kestra Private Wealth Services, LLC. An affiliate of Kestra is Mavin Bridge Capital and Kestra Investment Services are not affiliated. Kestra is and Kestras do not provide tax or legal advice. The opinions expressed in this commentary are those of the author and may not necessarily reflect those held by Kestra Investment Services, LLC or Kestra Advisory Services, LLC. This is for general information only and is not intended to provide specific investment advice or recommendations for any individual. It is suggested that you consult your financial professional, attorney, or tax advisor with regard to your individual situation. Comments concerning the past performance are not intended to be forward-looking and should not be viewed as an indication of future results.